Hey, friends, welcome to the Tennis and Bagels podcast. This is Vansh here. And of course, I'm sure as all of you listeners have heard, there's been breaking news the past week. Serena Williams has announced her farewell to tennis. And many reactions to this, many things to say about her legacy and her achievements on the court and what she's meant to tennis the past quarter of a century. And no one better to break it down than my guest here. You guys know him really well from our post-major chats, the one and only historian and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. Steve, it's my pleasure to have you here. How are you?
Back with you, Vansh. Looking forward to talking. This will be a slightly different topic for us than our usual post-major wrap-up, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, as am I immensely. But I just want to get started by, what was your initial reaction when you heard the news that?
I would say, I don't know if relief is the right word. You don't want to see a great player play too far past their prime. That's my feeling, in other words. And so you saw Serena, she came back from having a child, and for 2 years in a row there in 18 and 19, she's in the finals of both Wimbledon and the Open. She was still right in the thick of it. Lost to 4 different players, as you know, and I mean, they all played spectacular matches to beat her, from Kerber at Wimbledon in 18 to the 19 loss again to Halep, and then same thing at the Open, Naomi Osaka and Bianca Andreescu. They all played phenomenally well. But there was Serena in 4 major finals in those 2 years, and then got to another Australian semis, U.S. semis. She was still really in there in this period of 18, 19 into 20. But then, when she lost all this time from a year ago up to this Wimbledon, and now you're 40 and soon to be 41. It's just, to me, it was asking too much of herself. And I felt like it was just a very wise decision. I think realistically, she knows that it would just be almost a miracle to win another major now after all she's been through. And therefore, I think it's a logical, smart time to go. People will still have the memories of her at her zenith, but also slightly past her prime and still playing great tennis there in 18 and 19 as a mother. So what can you say? Just a phenomenal career.
Absolutely, and it's going to be pretty special that it's coming back to the U.S. Open, where she won her first major in 1999, and that's where it all kind of started for her.
Absolutely. I mean, that was remarkable, because we all thought at that point that Venus was the better player. Nobody necessarily disagreed with the father, Richard Williams's prognostication that in the long run, it was Serena who was going to be better. But at that stage in 99, 2000, Venus was clearly superior. So, but then, she went out in the semis to Hingis, and there's Serena capping off a great run and a string of 3-setters over the likes of Clijsters, Davenport, just a great tournament, and beats Hingis in the finals. So you had to just admire what she had done. And there's poor Venus sitting in the stands watching her sister win it. And you could sense that how frustrated she was not to be out there, and yet how happy she was for her sister. So it was as if she kind of arrived slightly ahead of schedule. You would have thought that it would have taken her a year or two more, and that Venus was the one that was going to get on the board there. And then Venus won Wimbledon the next year. And it was, what stood out to me, though, Vanch, about that 99 Open was just, we saw greater tennis from Serena in the years ahead, but it was the string of 3-set wins and 5-3 down in the third to Clijsters, and just how she was overcoming these great players one after another, until finally the Hingis match, which ended in straight sets, but a tight second set. And she, that was sort of a sign of things to come. Serena, the competitor, the player, added layers to her game in the years ahead. But to do that at 17, almost 18, but still 17 was just remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, she mentions in the Vogue article, it's so fitting that this came out in Vogue, because it just seems like something that the Williams sisters would do at this point in their career. But she did say that, these days, if I have to choose between building my tennis resume and building my family, I chose the latter. And so that's one of the reasons why, when I first heard this news, and of course you mentioned the one year break, and of course the injury that she suffered in Wimbledon in the first round against Sasnovich, to then take
Yeah.
all the time
Yeah.
off. I just felt like she played Wimbledon sort of to get that behind her, like get that memory sort of behind her, so that she can. I even heard her say in one of her press conferences leading up to Toronto that it was just sort of a like she wanted to. She's seeing light at the end of the tunnel, and it was sort of a day after that that this news broke, and it's just it feels fitting that she feels like she has so much more left to give in her post tennis life as well, like with her business ventures and a lot of different things and growing her family, and it feels like she's come to the conclusion. And it's been, you could sort of see reading the Vogue article that she's had to wrestle with this, and it hasn't been easy for her to speak about it, or because she's such a competitor and she wants to win. And
yes, and also Vansh, I mean, all the stuff that what you're saying about the family is very, very important. It's true. That's an aspect I left out. There's no doubt she takes great pride in being a mother and wants more children. I mean, regardless of whether she has more children or not, just the responsibility she has right now with one is enough. And, commitment to her husband as well. There's a lot of factors beyond the courts.
Yeah.
I think what kept her going so long, she really became a student of history at a certain point and realized and knew the numbers, knew when she was passing Billie Jean, knew when she was approaching Chrissy and Martina, realized that up down the road with Steffi at 22. And she really was targeting it in a very, almost in a Djokovic-like fashion. She really wasn't hiding the fact that this was a clear, concrete goal, and she wanted, and she finally passes Steffi. And then I think she really wanted to at least tie Margaret Court. And I'm sure she'll have some laments that she got that many chances in 18 and 19 to do that. On the other hand, she didn't really have many opportunities in those matches. They were all straight setters. So, I mean, she can't really regret it from the standpoint of feeling like she let one of those finals get away from a winning position because she didn't get herself in that winning position. And all I'm saying is I really admired that quest for history, because in her early in career, I don't really think in the early dominant days of, say, 2002, the Serena Slam, as they called it, into 03, winning the last three of 02 and the first one of 03. That at that stage, it was fun, and she was enormously competitive, and she wanted to be the best. But I don't think she had thought far down the road toward a Margaret Court or a Steffi Graf or any of those people. It wasn't until she got in the neighborhood of Billie Jean King, who had 12. Then it started to dawn on her what that how much the history mattered. And so she obviously will always, and there are reference to it in the Vogue piece. I will say this, Vansh, I think it's unfair when people, not of Serena in particular, but when anybody says that Margaret Court, I agree that I think Margaret was fortunate to win 11 Australians because there were some weak fields.
Yeah.
But in those days, but Margaret didn't just win her slams. In fact, she won the Grand Slam in 1970 in the Open era. So it's really unfair for people to classify her as sort of just from the amateur. And not to mention, you never had you didn't have a women's pro tour the way you did with the men. So with the men, with the winners back in the 50s and into the 60s before Open tennis in 68, the top amateurs would inevitably be approached by pro promoters like Jack Kramer to join the pro tour. And so then that pro tour, they had some really big names competing in pro tennis: Gonzalez, Lou Hode, Ken Rosewell, Laver joined them. And so it was a sort of a divided tennis world between the amateurs and the professionals. But that never existed in women's tennis. So when Margaret was winning all her slams as an amateur, they were granted, she got some breaks in Australia, yes, because the fields were not great over there. That's not her fault. But she was playing against the best, whoever the best players were that were available. And you didn't have this divide between the amateurs and the pros like you did, say, with Roy Emerson, who was a great, great player. But when Roy had won what was then a record 12 majors in the 60s, there were all those pros that I just mentioned that he didn't have to face. And when Rod Laver won his first Grand Slam in 62, he didn't have to face a lot of those great players like Rosewell and Gonzalez and Hode. So that's important, but that was not true of Margaret Court. So I don't think she should be diminished that way. In no way am I trying to claim that Margaret Court that I would put her in kind of an all-time ranking above Serena, because I wouldn't. But I do think her achievement of the 24 was legitimate, even allowing for the disappointing fields they had some years at the Australian.
Yeah, that's a good history lesson, I guess, for people. So, but she did reference sort of that quest that you're talking about, the history, the going for 24, that sort of adds to her greatness now that we look back, and we can sort of, that maybe at the time it would have seemed like opportunities missed, even though she didn't get very close in a lot of those finals. But you got the feeling that she was thinking about it a lot, and it's something that she felt didn't really help her. And she said in her Vogue piece that, that the way I see it, I should have had 30 plus Grand Slams, and I had my chances after coming back from birth. I went from a C-section to a pulmonary embolism to a Grand Slam final. She played while breastfeeding, played with postpartum depression. So I think, and she sort of feels like she didn't show up the way she felt like she could have. And then she sort of goes on to say that, she showed up 23 times, and that's extraordinary enough.
Yeah, I think that's being fair to herself. To say that she should have won 30, she can't really know, Vansh, how she would have felt if she'd passed Margaret at a certain point, for instance.
For sure.
If she had a couple more, would the incentive have been there? She did very well. I think the thing that changed was, prior to those 4 losses, she was almost unbeatable in major finals. That's what was a little surprising about 2018 and 19, was that, at one stage, I mean, she was like 18-4, 22-4. She had lost a couple to her sister, Venus, obviously, and lost
21-4 before, and then lost 6-8. So
which is surprising, because at that, when it was overwhelming like that, it was just a couple of Venus and one to Sharapova, and then finally Sam Stosur got her at the Open. That was a shocker in 11, but she was the quintessential big match player until then. You didn't feel like, it's a little bit like Pete Sampras was in his day, winning 14 of 18. You felt like it was not going to happen in the finals. You better beat her before the finals. That changed. No knock, because all those players played a spectacular tennis to beat her at Wimbledon and the Open, the 4 players I alluded to. But you got to believe. And I remember her coach, Patrick Martaglia, he said to me at one stage in an interview that they all played the match of their life. Well, yes, I think it's valid. You could say that maybe Halep will look back one day to beat Serena 2-2 on the center court. What more could you ask for from yourself? But then my argument to that is also, yes, even if they did play the match of their life, it was up to Serena to make sure the match of their life was not good enough. Mm-hmm. It's still Serena. And what I'm saying is, she didn't hold up her end of the bargain in any of those. And maybe understandably so, because at that age, you're thinking this could be my life. I think in each of those cases, she might have thought, I don't know how many more of these opportunities I'm going to get. I don't want to come down hard on her for that. I'm just saying that the Serena of prior years it didn't matter who was on the other side of the net. She was rarely going to lose those big finals. And that did happen to her, which I'm sure is frustrating when she looks back on it, because she played awfully well in some of those, in just about all of those cases on her way to the finals.
Yeah, for sure. And when you sort of look back at her career, and you see the greatness from 2012, and you see what she's accomplished between that 2012 to 2017 period. I feel like that's what I'll remember the most.
Well, yes. Now, the other disappointment, I mean, listen, great players, we tend to be, it's kind of unfair. We judge them by the loftiest standards. They judge themselves the same way. But the other lament that I think she will have is not winning the Grand Slam in 2015, because it was there for the taking. And she's playing Roberta Vinci, the Italian, in the semifinals of the US Open, with Flavia Pennetta on the other side, having upset Halep. So if she can beat Vinci, she's going to play Pennetta in the finals, who she'd beaten the year before. There's almost no way she could have lost to Pennetta, given Panetta's, her game style, the way she played. So, she was a terrific player, but it was just hard to imagine she could beat Serena in the finals. Vinci was that unorthodox kind of a break up your rhythm kind of player, came into the net a lot of touch, slice backhands, drop shots. She had it all.
Yeah.
going for it that day and beat Serena in 3. But I'm sure that's another one of those times where she probably feels she put too much of a burden on herself, too much pressure. She wanted it almost too badly. And there was so much talk, reminiscent in some ways of Djokovic coming to New York, a year ago and having this big buildup, and he's won the first 3. And, you believe it's almost destined to happen. And there he is in the finals. And he just, the tension was just overwhelming for him. It was almost palpable. And Medvedev played a great match and he did not. And so in a way, I was reminded of that with Serena, is that she was bottled up and her feet weren't moving well. And she shouldn't lose to Vinci, as tricky an opponent as Vinci is. And then the final would have been, I think, fairly routine. And if she'd had that Grand Slam, that would have offset. Well, first of all, if she would have won that match, she'd be tied with Margaret now. But above all, it would have put her in that niche along with Little Mo Connolly, who did it in 53, Margaret Court in 70, and Steffi in 88. They're the 3 women that had won the Grand Slam. And it would have been a big feather in Serena's cap to have pulled that achievement off. So I'm sure those are the 2 things she'd look back. In some ways, I think she would look back on the 15 one and maybe be a little bit more frustrated, feeling like that was maybe some of the best tennis she was playing in her entire career. And she's trying to cap off an impeccable season and win another Open and get the Grand Slam. And it's there for the taking. And she couldn't quite pull it off.
Yeah, for sure. It was very, it was quite a moment for her to face that down, like, being 2-love up in that 3rd set, having
a
fight.
Oh yeah, she had a point for 3 love that would have made a big difference. And couldn't, it was a real opening for her, and she'd won the first set as well. And it slipped from her grasp, and you could feel it. You could just feel her anxiety and apprehension. It was so clear, because she didn't move her feet nearly as well as she normally does, particularly in that 3rd set when it started slipping away from 2-love. And so that was devastating, I'm sure. And it was one of the fastest press conferences we've ever had with her afterwards, because I don't think it probably was going to take her days, weeks, months to try to talk about that, to move past the emotions and be able to rationally discuss that match and discuss the disappointment of not winning the Grand Slam. That was, you think of those things, but of course, there were so many more triumphs. There was so much more that was positive. And starting with that first Open, and think about that, winning the first Open in 99, as you mentioned, and then the last one at the 17 Australian. So it's not a full 18 years, but close enough. And that's an incredible winning record span that says a lot about her, where there were so many ups and downs in between, but where she was still, and to think that she's also in the finals of that Open in 19. So 20 years after winning it, she's back in the finals. That's also incredible as well. So the longevity is incredibly impressive, despite the fact that there were some years she would have liked to have had back, where she was hurt, where there were family issues. Some of this was way out of her control, but where she was not able to give her best.
For sure. And of course, I also did see this video that IBM put out, which was sort of looking at 1999 Serena versus 2017 Australian Open version of Serena. And it was just impressive to see how much her game had changed and evolved over those 20 years, and just so much more reliant, even more so on her serve, and just a lot more. I mean, she just rolled through that title, I remember, in 2017, and of course, 2 months pregnant.
Yeah,
and there's
exactly.
About it. And
No, sorry, Vansh. No, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It was so much. Her game was so much more nuanced, and there were so many more shades, and she could do so many different things off the ground that she couldn't have even dreamed of in '99. She was a better match player. Everything had improved, and I have to say, you alluded to 2012, and it's like you got to look back to Moratoglu and him coming in. I honestly believe that he made a big, big difference, because I don't think, with all due respect to her father, who was brilliant in the way he was able to raise his 2 daughters unconventionally and turn them into all-time greats. And no knock on him, but I think what he had done was he'd sent her to Rick Macci, and he got her proper schooling, and he was a great motivator. But I don't think he had the kind of tennis mind that Patrick has. And Serena was open to hearing what he had to say. So I really believe from that point on in 12, it was no accident that everything turned when he came in. I don't say he was solely responsible, but I think he had played a large role in the expansion of her game, in the fact that she became a much, much more well-rounded player.
Yeah. You referenced their upbringing just now, but I just wanted to ask you, so, sort of the upbringing of Richard Williams, raising the two sisters in Compton, a lot of disadvantages, I guess you could say, they had relative to other players growing up at that time, and the kind of lifestyle that they lived. And of course, Rick Macci, and then the whole Venus Williams story, of course, in King Richard, which I really like, by the way, that it was solely about Venus, because that really sort of set the tone for her sister, and sort of celebrating her right now. I just think it feels so appropriate. But just always, living in the shadow of her sister. Obviously, she's very different from her sister personality-wise. Venus is a lot more stoic, and Serena wears her heart on her sleeve, very emotional. Obviously has had some of her outbursts on court, and but you just really feel like she's inspired a lot of women to be like strong and be who they are, and identify with themselves, and be strong and fight, and all of those qualities that I think you see someone of her color, her stature come up through the last 20 years, and it's given a lot of belief to a lot of young players that we're watching now, in your Coco Gauffs and Osakas of the world. And so it's kind of, you feel like she's paved the way and helped bring change in tennis. And I think that's the one thing about her legacy that.
Yeah, she has been transformational in that regard, and the two of them are transformational. I think the poignant part of this is that there was Venus, who was a dominant force herself, even after Serena won that 99 Open. And then Venus came back the next 2 years, Wimbledon and the Open. It looked like she was going to end up at that stage. I would have guessed Venus ends up with double-digit majors, 15 or so. It didn't happen. She got 5 Wimbledons and 2 Opens, didn't win the other 2, and it was a great career. But think about it. She was surpassed by her sister. She was very gracious about it. Never sensed anything begrudging in her attitude. She was probably Serena's biggest cheerleader. But the poignant part of it is, you just have to imagine what that was like, because she was such a great player herself when she was young, and remains so. And she also has had this enduring greatness and playing into her 40s. But I don't think she could have imagined at the end of 2001 that things were going to turn out quite the way they did. She knew that Serena was going to be great, but I don't think she was fully aware deep within her that her sister was going to be quite as driven. She knew she was driven, but she didn't know it would go to the extreme that it did, in a very positive way, that Serena was going to develop this sense of history and wanting to be considered the greatest of all time, and it was going to keep pushing herself, and was going to become this phenomenal big match player. I think Venus imagined that they were going to trade off a bit more. No, in other words, that she'd have her years, Serena would have her years, and they'd have a closer rivalry, and that she probably thought more of the prestigious prizes were going to come her way. But she handled it all with immense grace. You never sense at all that she was jealous of what her sister was achieving.
Yeah, for sure. That's why it was so great to see her resurgence in 2017 when she came back and reached those 2 major finals.
Yeah, that was really nice.
She'd also gone through a lot in that period with their Cyrogene syndrome and just a lot of difficult, like with an autoimmune condition. And you just feel like it just, because it was going in, they were sort of trading off a little bit, like until 2008, 2009. And then it sort of it started to change.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Coming in.
There was some trade-off, and it's true, because in 08, Venus played a great match to beat Serena at Wimbledon, and then Serena comes back and beats Venus in a kind of an epic 2 tiebreaker match in the quarters of the Open under the lights. So yes, she was still in there with her and continued even after that to play some great matches against her. But you're right, the syndrome really hurt her and sapped her of her energy, to be sure. but I do think things had changed before then. I think that, in their mindsets. But in any case, Serena, it was remarkable what she did in when she was at the height of her powers. And I think we got to see the couple of phases of that, because I thought that period of 02 into 03 was pretty spectacular too. And then we had that period with the two of them playing all those major finals against each other, the French Wimbledon US of 02, and then the Australian of 03, and then again at Wimbledon. So they played 5 out of 6 finals in that span were Serena versus Venus. But that's where I think she kind of, something sank into Venus that I may have some sporadic success against her, but boy, Serena wants this, and she might want it even more than I do.
Yeah, I think that really hit her. That's true. And also, you look at the final that they played in 2003 at the Australian Open. That was maybe their best match in the majors.
It was a great one. Yeah, it was. It was really hard fought, tight 3 sets down to the wire. I'm not so sure that I wouldn't rate the 08 quarter at the Open even higher for some reasons, but certainly of their finals.
Yeah, of their finals, I meant.
Final by far. And Venus couldn't have played much better.
Yeah, for sure. And then it was cool to see them sort of play. They played their 31st meeting in front of no one in a parking lot and in Lexington, and there was a pretty high quality match there as well. It was. They had a couple of really great confrontations, that were in out of the way places, and that said a lot for them too. Is that they took all the matches seriously. That was also a nice part of the story. Was they came to terms with playing against each other. Each of them hated it initially, understandably, having to go through each other. But then there came a point not too long, and I'd say by 2002 when they had to play all those, and then they just sort of understood, okay, this is part of the deal. This is part of being a professional, and it's a nice thing that we would only lose to each other and nobody else. So I thought and then I think that's why some of the quality of some of their matches went up. Is they'd come to terms with it, and that was nice to see. Never a great stylistic matchup because they were too similar in too many ways. There wasn't a spectator's delight the way, say, Serena against Justine Henin or Evert and Navratilova or Graf and Celis. Or, there were more contrasts in some of these other matches, but the level of their tennis against each other went up exponentially. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you look at all of her rivals, across 20 years, all the way from Naomi Osaka all the way till the very beginning with Martina Hingis. And sort of the one name that you just mentioned, which is Justine Henin, that's the one that sort of stands out to me because they played each other 7 times in majors. And, Justine had won 4 of them. And it was, and that's where you really got that contrast. And you just felt like that was always a really tight rivalry. I mean, Serena edged it out 8-6 in the end, but you just felt like Justine had a lot to offer and trouble Serena in some of those matches.
Oh, she did. No, I think we were deprived. I think Justine's quitting, which surprised me because she never won Wimbledon, which I think she should have had on her resume. But that could have been potentially the greatest rivalry of Serena's career if we could have had years more of it. And I think there would have been some fluctuating fortunes there. And Justine was very tough mentally. And I'm sorry we didn't get more of that because it was really a pleasure to watch them play. I mean, I saw that, I saw a bunch of them, at the US Open, and then at the famous match at the French where Justine put her hand up and the big controversy there at the French. And that was unfortunate because it was just a great match outside of that moment. And I don't think that determined the outcome of the match, but that should have been the sort of defining rivalry of even alongside the one with her sister for obvious reasons with so many major finals. But I wish we'd seen a lot more of Justine versus Serena.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think what's good about this announcement, Steve, is that I feel like we can just properly celebrate and enjoy this last 1 month because, for a while, I didn't think Serena would announce it in this way where, put a timestamp on it. I just figured, she would be out to take her time and it would just kind of linger on and on for years to come. So the fact that she's now announced this and we can, the ticket sales at the US Open are through the roof. And, of course, Everyone waits to see the draw at the U.S. Open, and there's just so much more rising on this U.S. Open as a result of this.
Yeah, it's going to be from the standpoint of the ticket holders. I hope some of them, they have to try to calculate it. Like, for instance, you got to believe that Serena's first match likely to be at night. In the first week, they probably would try to play her if she hangs on, and can win several rounds. If she wins 3 rounds or whatever, however well she does, they're certainly going to want to put her on more at night during the week. And then if she makes it to the first weekend, that's a different story. Then television would want that during the day. But I wonder how many people are factoring that into their ticket purchases, that if they're looking to see Serena in the first, especially if it's going to be one of those first 3 or 4 nights, the time that the night session would be the likely place to find her.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine them putting Serena in the day. And of course, she just played last week. She played against Belinda Bencic, a very difficult opponent for her, especially particularly at this stage of her career, because the way Bencic can just change directions and redirect shots, hits the ball really hard, keeps Serena guessing on her back foot, moving out constantly. I kind of feel like this match against Raducanu will be a little different, just because I don't think Raducanu has the type of firepower to just hit her off the court. And I think Serena will have her time to work her way into the match, and she'll be able to dictate play a lot more, I think.
Yes, the question is going to be: is she sharp enough when it matters? And is she converting her break points? And I don't disagree with your overview of the match. It's just I still think that the lack of match play, which really showed up against Bencic, could still be there against Emma. On the other hand, that crowd is going to be overwhelmingly for Serena, even though they don't. I think they respect a lot what Emma did at the U.S. Open last year. But you're right. I mean, it's one that she can it's a match she can sink her teeth into, and that where she may set the tempo. But then the question is going to be, is she match sharp enough, to get it done, or does it slip away despite opportunities?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's going to come down to the clutchness factor, and that's very difficult.
Also, how does Emma? Can Emma, again, Serena, good high first serve percentage, then it's hard to imagine Emma breaking her much. But if the first serve is a little bit off, Emma could maybe start asserting herself with some aggressive second serve returns, which she's capable of making. I would say, I don't know how you feel. In the end, I kind of lean towards Serena in 3.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same. I think Emma is the slight favorite going in, but I think Serena will be able to find her way into this match. And then I think her experience and having played with the crowd rallying her at the end, I think will prevail her over the line. That's kind of how I see it. But I think it's good for Raducanu that she's playing this match, because for the first time in a while, it'll feel like they're not all talking about her and she's not the center of the spotlight. And so I think that
you're right.
Take a lot of pressure off of her, especially coming into the U.S. Open where she has to defend her title.
Yeah, I agree with that. And she'll also have that feeling that she still believes that she can beat her. So that's a nice position to be in. Feel like an underdog, but feel like you have it in you to get it done. But from Serena's standpoint, I mean, winning that match and maybe winning 1 or 2 more in Cincinnati, however many matches she can get there, it's going to make a difference in New York. I think it could help her a lot. Not that I expect her to make any kind of a deep run in New York, but it would just be very helpful to have, say, 3 more matches in Cincinnati on top of the 2 last week. Then she's got something, then she's getting back into the flow a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, tennis fans have just been blessed the last 25 years, and it's always sad when legends retire, but I think it's part of the game, and the sport will continue to move on, and we'll make new memories. And of course, it's a big hole that it's a big hole that Serena sort of like symbolically means for the tour. But I think we're in a good place right now in the women's game where we can really take it forward, and we have a lot of young talent coming through, and I think we're in good hands in terms of the depth.
Oh, I do too. What we need are the champions. We have to see what's going to happen with Iga right now, because she had that wonderful 37 match winning streak. It's been a little shakier lately since winning the French, and kind of a shocking loss at Wimbledon, and now she comes into the Open not as heavy a favorite as we might have thought. But I think we need players like that that can win multiple majors in a year, say at least 2 majors in a year, so that we get a sense of a little bit more continuity, a little bit more greatness being exhibited. Not to say that we necessarily need a dominant Serena champion, but I think we need players that are over a period of years are going to pick up a bunch of majors and keep coming back into the winner's circle and grabbing more of those prizes. Yeah. In addition, because the depth is clearly there. There's no doubt about that. And, and then we see Simona Halep coming through last week, and it was nice to see her, so close to the Open, finding her best form, and you get the feeling that maybe she can make a real go of it in New York as well. So you want that kind of a combination. Yes, a lot of sparkling new stars and depth and potential champions, but also an elite cast at the top. I still want to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see some rivalries emerge, and it was great to see Simona Halep come through, because she hasn't had a whole lot of success at the U.S. Open. Just made the one semifinal and no success at the other 3.
So. No, the conditions haven't always suited her that well, Vansh. I think maybe the courts, by and large, have been a little too quick for her liking, but maybe this is the year. You kind of hope so, because we've seen greatness from her, and we saw her come so close in Australia, in the Wozniacki match, and then we saw her in brilliant against Serena, winning that Wimbledon final 2-2, and then the French coming back against Sloane Stephens. So she's all the 3 other majors she's shown. We've seen pretty much the best of Simona. It's time we saw it in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, someone else, another legend who's coming back this week is Rafael Nadal, who hasn't played since Wimbledon. And he's coming back in Cincinnati, and he's got a tough draw to work himself back into form. And he was supposed to play last week, but the abdominal injury has kept him away for a while. So how do you kind of see his chances? And do you think he's the favorite going into the U.S. Open right now?
Maybe slight. It's, he's had such great success there. To win, considering that he's still stuck on 2 Wimbledons, and he finally got his second Australian this year unexpectedly in a startling upset against Medvedev. You look at the U.S. Open with the four triumphs. It's pretty impressive, including as recently as 17 and 19. So yeah, I think he probably is. And just having won the 2 majors earlier in the year, and even in his really compromised physical condition, making the semifinals of Wimbledon. I would say he is. I would say he is the slight, but there's a bunch of other guys. You just wonder, does Carlos explode there? He's had a disappointing stretch since the French, but I think we're going to see him kind of burst out of the doldrums a bit and start playing his very best tennis again. And then Medvedev is going to be still tough to defeat as the defending champion, but I don't know how comfortable he's going to be in that role. And then you have the likes of Sinner, who's coming on strong. And they're still, all things considered, Vansh, with Rafa's experience, yes, I'd say you make him the very slight favorite. And I don't think he actually needs a lot out of Cincinnati, because he's showing.
Because all the times he's been healthy this year, he's come out on top. So I feel like he can just carry that through, even if he's
healthy and seemingly not very well prepared. He came into the Australian having missed having played just the one tournament in Washington, 2 matches in Washington last summer, the whole second half following Roland Garros, and he plays 250 event in Melbourne, wins it, and then wins the Australian. And then he got badly disrupted on the way to the French this year and walked off very hobbled when he lost to Shapovalov in Rome, and things were looking kind of bleak, and he still won the French despite everything, despite preparation that he didn't like, understandably. So my point is, if he lost early in Cincinnati, I wouldn't put much stock in that, because I think he'll have time to play his way into form in New York.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Alcaraz. Obviously, he blew us away up until Madrid, his title run there, and since then he's 14-5, and for other players you'd be like, okay, wow, they're coming on strong and this is amazing, but sort of he set the bar so high with his success as a 19-year-old in the beginning. But having lost to Paul last week, do you kind of do you think this is just like, are you worried at all, or is it just kind of just natural growing pain? And for the first time he admitted that he felt the pressure
a little bit. I think I think so. Yeah, and himself a chance to come back from 5-2 down there and nearly broke him in the last game. And he always seems to go down swinging. And I feel like, yeah, he could use a little of a boost coming to the Open, no doubt about it. On the other hand, it'll be like he will love returning to the scene of where he made such a big international splash last year in Tsitsipas. And it was sort of his first big, huge splash at a major, and goes out of the quarters. And I just feel like, you know what, he will be so inspired to come back to New York, and I think he believes he could win the tournament. So, but on the other hand, it just wouldn't hurt, given this sort of a losing, the way this season is sort of, the recent stretch has kind of gotten away from him, and not losing some matches he might have expected to win, including 2 losses to Sinner, not just Wimbledon, but then loses to him on the clay in the final. So, he's taken some lumps that he didn't expect to. So I think it would really do him at least get Cincinnati, or perhaps win it, the lift he could coming into New York. But either way, I think he's going to be very inspired at the Open. No doubt in my mind about that.
Mm-hmm. And then for sure, Medvedev is an interesting one because of his didn't play Wimbledon, and of course he has all these points to defend, and defending champion, and he always comes on strong this time of the year. But you feel like there's a lot more pressure on him this year.
Yeah, we don't know. It's this kind of unusual moment for him. You can compare it a bit to what happened in Melbourne, because there he's going for a second straight slam title. So you're wondering, is he now kind of wearing the robe of champion and comfortable wearing it, and thinking of himself as really the best player in the world, as the guy that should be winning majors on top of majors? And that was such a jarring loss to Nadal in the finals there, from 2 sets to love, and 3-2 love 40 in that third set, with a chance to break it open. And I in some ways, I don't think he's ever fully recovered from that since. On the other hand, he won Los Cabos, and yes, he lost to Nick last week, but I think he'll be ready for New York no matter what happens in Cincinnati. And the question would be, if he gets himself into the quarters or semis at that stage, is he defending, or does the pressure get to him a bit? Because he's a fascinating personality. Not his tennis, but his emotional, the emotional roller coaster that we seem to go through with him, that he seems to go through, and where sometimes it can. I'm fascinated to see how he performs in New York.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Kyrgios coming off of the Wimbledon final, and he's finally put together like this stretch where he seems to be trying a lot harder, and he's more motivated. And obviously, he had the title in Washington, won doubles as well, and it seems like he's better and more motivated and playing for something more now. But, you mentioned obviously the conditions in New York, and, the physicality sort of holding back Nick in previous majors. But, what do you expect to see from Nick?
Well, I thought that it was a good sign that he, how well he held up physically at Wimbledon and getting to the final, and despite the fact that he didn't have to play Nadal in the semis. So the work that he'd had to do to get there, he showed that he was fit, and he's shown it again in DC and Montreal with a win and a tournament win and a quarterfinal back to back. And okay, so he faded a bit in the third set against Hurkacz, but no disgrace. So I feel like if he can manage to get through the first 3 or 4 rounds in New York without taking too much out of himself, that could make a big difference. I don't think he can afford to be getting in a couple of 5-setters in the first week, because that could catch up to him in the second. But what I'm saying is, in the final analysis, I see Nick with a reasonable chance to make the semifinals with a good draw.
Yeah, I think that's very much in the realm of possibility, given the field that we have right now. But obviously, this means a lot of opportunity coming through. I mean, obviously, with the big three not having played a lot of, skipping a lot of Masters 1000s, and Djokovic out and Zverev not there, and it just kind of feels like this is up for grabs. Like, it's in a way that obviously Nadal and Medvedev and Alcaraz are your 3 sort of big favorites, but apart from that, it really feels wide open. And we just had Carreño Busta winning, and Montreal playing some terrific tennis. He always seems to play his best this time of the year.
And Hurkacz still playing quite well. He's still very dangerous. I wouldn't expect him to win it, but he could be a big factor in New York, and wouldn't shock me to see him in the semis or finals with the right draw as well. Yeah, it's it's going to be an interesting Open. Not to mention, I guess there's still that outside chance of Djokovic coming with it. You know, there's all this talk out there about the CDC, and they did make some changes in the regulations surrounding COVID. And the question is, will they take the next step, and will they take it soon enough where they change the regulations on people coming into the US who are unvaccinated? Mm-hmm. It still seems unlikely, but it's not impossible now. But if Djokovic did play, the disadvantage he'd have is not having played since Wimbledon. He would have liked to have had at least one hard court tournament coming in. Yeah. So then he'd have to play his way into form. But it would be nice to see him there if that all worked out. Still, I'd say odds certainly against.
Yeah, I think odds against at the moment, but there is still, you know, a slight outside chance. Yeah. But Steve, I think we'll have a great Cincinnati. We'll have an exciting U.S. Open with a lot of great stories, and you know, finish off the season strong. And it was nice to chat about Serena and her legacy and close that chapter. And it was great to have you join me.
Yeah, Vansh, I enjoyed it. And we didn't talk about, just the last comment I would make. I think the likelihood is that Serena gets to say the third or fourth round with a decent draw. That the crowds propel her, that there's this exhilaration, that she's got the adrenaline going, and they help. Well, it's going to be very tough on any opponents who are have the misfortune to play her on what is surely going to be her last Open, because the crowds would just be overwhelmingly behind Serena. So I could see her maybe making the round of 16. That would be nice in considering that it's such a farewell. You just want to see her at least make some kind of impression this tournament, and maybe go out against, well, one of the top 3 or 4 seeds, whoever. We don't know the draw at this point, but that, and in a well played match, that would be a nice scenario the way I see it.
Yeah, I guess the more the crowd gets, and the more Serena's able to get out of her last tournament, the better we are all for it. So we wish her the best, and of course it was a pleasure watching her all these years, and you know, she'll be missed in the tennis world, but we'll continue to, I'm sure she'll do a lot of great things once her career is over. So
I don't have any doubt about it. And I also have no doubt that she's picked the right time to say goodbye, because she's analyzed it. And I think she had a lot of time to think between Wimbledon 2021 and Wimbledon 2022. You know, it was a very reflective period in her life, I'm sure. And now I think she realizes that this is a very fitting time to leave the game, and to leave it with people having so many powerful memories of her. As you said at the start, basically a quarter of a century career, which I was just writing about in a piece. It's amazing when you think about it. Starting in 98, she will have had one of the longest careers, even though there were some interruptions and absences. She kept fighting back. But this is the time. This is the time for her farewell. I have no doubt in my mind about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll also see what happens with Venus, and how she goes out, and what what her exit from tennis will sort of look like.
Yeah, hard to see her playing much longer either. And maybe a part of her wants to leave close to the time that Serena is too, or maybe there's a part of her that feels she could play on one more year, maybe doing it predominantly in doubles. But that's going to be interesting to see what Venus opts to do. Yeah,
for sure. But either way, we've been blessed, and we'll see how much longer we'll see how how far it takes us, and it should be a great U.S. Open, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too, Vansh. And we'll talk when it's over in mid-September.
Yeah, should be great. Looking forward to it. Thanks as always.
Thank you, Vansh.